By the way, the third stage of the trap of debt is the addiction stage. If you did not take any corrective measures after the first and second stages, as I explained in the previous videos, then your situation will degenerate into the third stage, the addiction stage. Addiction to borrowing is a reality, and I think I will shed more light about it in future episodes. But allow me today to just share with you how the addiction stage of the trap of debt looks like. Now, in this stage of addiction, your reliance on borrowing gets heavier. You begin to borrow at the slightest provocation. In this stage, you find yourself borrowing from person A to pay person B, borrowing from person C to pay person A, and then because person B has forgotten, you go back to person B to borrow again to pay person C. And that cycle continues and continues. You're simply managing the situation. You're simply trying to make your lenders believe that you are a very good borrower because according to their records, you have paid them. But the truth is that you've been struggling. You've been borrowing from this person to pay this person, borrowing from the other to pay the other, and just trying to paint a picture that is not real. Now, in this stage of the trap of debt, pressure from lenders begins to heighten, begins to grow, begins to get to a level that you get uncomfortable with. Lenders begin to call you every other day. They begin to push you for their money, and they are calling left, right, and center because there are now many. Remember, in the second stage, we were doing multiplication. In the second stage, if you only had one debt in the first stage, in the second stage, you're beginning to borrow more. And your debts are beginning to get into arrears. So you're multiplying your debts, but they are also continuing to get into arrears, all of them. Now, in this third stage, you're borrowing even more as you try to firefight. You're also borrowing more because what you have as income is not enough for you to rely on. So you're also borrowing for consumption. So your debt portfolio is growing, not because you're doing anything substantial, but because you're trying to survive. And you're also trying to paint a picture in the eyes of your lenders that you are still afloat. But at this stage, you cannot ignore the fact that you are struggling financially. It is written all over in plain language. It is clear to you that things are not okay. The choice is yours to ignore or to take measures to correct it. But either way, you are now in the picture that things are not fine. Now, in this stage, you also find yourself beginning to give your lenders unrealistic promises. This is the stage where people begin to be crafty. This is the stage where people have a language that is so sweet, a language that because at this stage they have sworn that they will do anything to get debt. So they will use any words. Some people in this stage will kill their relatives just to whip the emotions of lenders for them to be given money. In this stage, some people will have a lot of emotionally whipping stories. They will take their siblings to jail. They will arrest people, if you understand what I'm saying. They will come up with all sorts of stories. This is that stage where people are beginning to give those explanations to their landlords that are not making sense. This is that stage where you find yourself promising your lenders that you'll give them money on Tuesday. Nitakusort Tuesday. When you and I know that the only income that is coming is going to get to you after 30 days, for instance. But you're here telling your lenders that you give them money next week, Tuesday. Unrealistic. What people forget at this point is that when you make a promise to your lender that you will not fulfill, then in the records of your lender, you cease being a borrower. You start becoming a liar. So on top of the fact that you have defaulted in their books, they have branded you a liar. So that means then every other promise you're going to make thereafter will never be taken serious. And that is what begins to happen in this stage. Now, borrowing in this stage continues until a point when lenders begin to deny people credit. In this stage, the mind is getting used to the fact that debt is an alternative to survival. Debt is an alternative to income. Debt is a shortcut of making money. So in this stage, you've gotten to the point where every financial need that you have, your mind rushes to borrowing. Your mind rushes to ask, who can sort me so that I will sort them later? How you will get the money to sort them is a whole different story. But what you're simply telling yourself is that I need to find someone to sort me now so that I will sort them later. Now, later on, you will definitely have to borrow from another person because your income is already taken up, is no longer enough to handle your debt burden. Now, in this addiction stage, chances are high that you have already now been listed adversely with CRB. At the multiplication stage, the second stage, you are still borrowing because you still have the ability to borrow. So in that stage, you have not defaulted beyond 90 days for you to be adversely listed. But now in the addiction stage, you have now grossly defaulted, and many of your lenders are now listing you adversely with CRB, and that begins to minimize your accessibility to further credit. That means then you also begin to borrow from the black market. You begin to borrow from the informal market, from people who do not check up on your credit rating. Now, such people are always expensive. So your situation is getting worse by the day. Your debt burden is worsening, it's getting heavier every other day. The cost of your borrowing is increasing every other day. Before long, you'll be owing people money that you have never touched at a go. If someone asks you what your debt portfolio looks like, you tell them the figures, they get shocked because you're mentioning things that people wonder what you exactly did with the money. But sometimes it's just the multiple effect of the interest that is associated with borrowing from the informal sector, because you are running away from sectors that, from the formal sector that is asking for your CRB report. And so this situation continues to degenerate and to degenerate. In this stage also, you find yourself wanting to pay only the interest portion of the debts that you have. And especially now that you've started borrowing from the informal sector, from the Shylocks and such arrangements, you find yourself renewing debt. And a lot of this debt is short-term debt because you're simply firefighting. You're simply trying to survive. You're simply trying to cool off person A using person B. So here, you also get to a point where you begin to talk to those people to allow you to renew the debt, to only pay the interest so that then you can have another cycle to try and be hopeful that something will change. Many times, things refuse to change by themselves. But that is the logic that goes on behind the mind of someone in the third stage of the trap of debt. At this point, your stress levels, courtesy of your debt position, have also grown because, stress basically is our reaction when the world is exerting demands on us that are heavier than our capacity to supply. So your lenders are exerting pressure to you more than you can afford to respond to handle. So stress levels are also getting high. You could still salvage this situation at this point if you sought for help. Sadly, many people want to try and fight harder. Many people want to try and pretend that they're still doing fine. Many people want to try and borrow some more as long as they can be able to lie to someone that they can repay debt so that we can continue to see them looking afloat. But the reality is that at this point, it is clear that they are struggling. It is clear to them. It may not be clear to the world, but to them, it is no longer hidden. It is no longer, they are no longer guessing whether they're struggling or not. They know they are struggling, but they have a choice to make. If you put in effort at this stage, you could still reverse the situation. But for many people, it degenerates into the fourth stage the lock stage. Look, stick here for the fourth stage. Be sure to subscribe, and this is by the way.